Hello, happy July, everyone. This is Sharon Colvin. I am the Youth Services Consultant for the Vermont Department of Libraries, and welcome to my web series called What is Sharon Reading? You can find archives of this and my other series here if you go to libraries.vermont.gov and click on Services. And then Children and Teens, this is my page or pages. And if you go to Resources and then Collection Development, here are all my archive new books series, and then my archive What is Sharon Reading series. And then if you go down a little bit more, there's a link on how to use Library Thing. I highly recommend, if you haven't done that, that you check that out. There's lots of really good tools there, and I hope that it's helpful. So let's get started. I'm going to go into my Library Thing catalog. I cannot possibly remember everything that I've read. It's impossible. So I keep track using this tool. And I'm going to start right here with Vanishing Girls. I left off last time right here. So I organized these. This is sorted according to when I entered them. So right now this is what I'm reading, and these are the most recent books that I finished. So if we just go down a little bit more, and there we go. Let's get started. So Vanishing Gross by Lauren Oliver. I will start out by saying I love Lauren Oliver, and I really, really wanted to read this, and I was on hold for the audiobook for like a month, maybe more, and I was really excited to read it, and I found this book to be incredibly disappointing. Now, I realize that some teens and librarians might disagree with that, and that's totally fine. In my opinion, though, this one just didn't really do anything for me. In fact, I couldn't even remember what it was about. I had to go back and read the summaries to like jog my memory, which is not a good sign. Yeah, I usually have a pretty good memory for this stuff, and it just, So anyway, it's about two sisters. It's definitely a high school book. It's a mystery. So you have two sisters, and it's told in alternating chapters. And you know that there's been an awful accident, and they're not really speaking to each other. And one of them was driving, you find out, and the other one was injured. And then, one of them disappears. And that's the weird thing. You'd think that in a disappearance mystery it would be all, blood pumping, adrenaline, whatever. I just didn't care. And I know it makes me a horrible person, but I wasn't attached to these characters. Towards the end, a 9-year-old girl disappears too, and there's this whole mystery about maybe these two girls are connected, and there's a human trafficking element, and I thought that was really interesting. But I didn't feel like it was wrapped up well. All in all, I just thought this book was kind of a miss. You can see I gave it 3.5 stars. It's got some elements that I think teens will like, but it's not my favorite. And one of the dangers with reading a lot of these books and being attached to authors is I hold my favorite authors to really high standards. So I expect so much more from Laura Oliver, and maybe that's part of my problem. All right, next, Lucky Strike by Bobby Pyron. This is a book we got a while ago, and I had high hopes for it, and honestly fell a little short. So it's in that DCF age range. It's definitely like a, 4th, 5th grade read. And it's kind of a cute story. The problem I have with it is that it's about being struck by lightning. Okay, being struck by lightning is not a good thing. In fact, it's incredibly dangerous, and I don't recommend it to anybody. This book makes it seem almost good, and that I have a huge problem with, especially with this age group. So you have this boy who was accidentally struck by lightning while playing mini golf, and that part was kind of funny. And he's like the unluckiest kid ever. But then when he's struck by lightning, suddenly he gets really lucky. And, he lives, I think, in Florida, and there's a lot of, he lives in a mobile home with his grandfather, and they don't have a lot of money, and all of a sudden he's popular and whatever. But in the process, he abandons his best friend, which is, it's that whole coming of age thing and growing apart. But then in the end, and this is the part, I'm going to ruin the ending for you. So plug your ears if you want, but I just have this huge problem with the end. So in the end, there's a hurricane coming, And the best friend goes out to protect the turtles who are laying eggs in the sand, which, okay. And then he goes out to help her in the middle of a hurricane, and gets struck by lightning again. And of course, they're all okay. I have trouble with the whole consequences thing, and I'm sure he scared the bananas out of his grandfather. I think skip this one. I think it looked better than it really was. Okay, The Red Queen. This book I have trouble with. I know a lot of other people really liked it, and in fact, people are nominating it for GMBA. And I had high hopes for it. It just fell flat for me. I will tell you that I am not the type of person to skim books, but I was listening to this book and I skipped whole sections in the middle. I just could not. I just didn't I didn't care. It was really overwritten. I felt like the whole middle part was just this never-ending battle, and it just wasn't interesting to me. And I got the gist of the book by, skimming and reading the end. The premise was interesting. So you have this society, it's dystopic, and in this society, there are two types of people. You have the silver bloods and the red bloods, and they actually do bleed different colors. And the people with the silver blood have these extra powers, and the people with the red blood don't. And so you have this kind of caste system, and the people with the silver blood are royalty, and the people with the red blood are, servants. So you have this girl who is a red person, and she got a job in the royal court serving during this big event, and she is witnessing this kind of choosing. And I'll tell you why this is interesting in a minute. So the king is looking for a new princess or a wife for his son, and the way that they decide this is by this grand production. And like, this is where I thought it was interesting. It really reminded me of the lion fights in Rome. It was kind of like this huge kind of Colosseum-esque setting, and you had all these women who were silvers, and they were fighting for the attention of the royal family, and they were using, instead of really killing each other, they were using their crazy skills, and their skills were wow. So like, one could control the earth and could make earthquakes, one could control water and could kill people with water, and I mean, it was really wild. And so you have all these contenders, and each of them, it gets crazier and crazier. And of course, you have your favorites for winning. And this one woman can control metal, which is freaky. Anyway, that part is very interesting. And then what happens, this is where it loses me. This girl who's a red, who's serving, accidentally falls into the arena, and protects herself against this crazy metal controlling woman, and it turns out she has special powers too, and so she's kind of a enigma. She's a red, but she has silver powers, and who knows. So anyway, the queen gets a hold of this, and they decide the best way to cover this up is to pretend that she isn't a red, and to put her in this kind of choosing arena for the prince's hand. And then it just gets weird to me. I don't know. She's trying to figure out where she comes from, and there's all this like war. I don't know. And like, they want her to keep this secret. And I don't know. I found the premise interesting. The war that unfolds doesn't interest me. And I'll tell you that I think part of the reason I didn't like this book so much is because I'm reading the selection series at the same time, and the selection series is just way more gripping. And I think I was comparing the two. So if you haven't read the selection series, you might like this one a little bit better. But all in all, it wasn't my favorite, which is sad. All right, next, the Friendship Brittle. This book I really liked. I was a little surprised because she wrote The Spy Catchers of Maple Hill, which is not my favorite book ever. But this book I thought was really interesting. So the premise is you have these two friends who are separating. They're going in different paths. They have different interests. And Ruth and her best friend, let's see if I can remember her best friend's name. It doesn't really matter. Okay, one of the interesting things about this book is that Ruth has two moms. Oh, Charlotte was her best friend. Charlotte has two dads. And it's completely a non-issue in this book. It's not a big deal. It's just the way their families are. I do love that part. So they live, I think, in San Francisco, and they hang out in the library all the time. Charlotte's dad is a librarian, and one of her dads is a librarian, and they live above the library, which is kind of cool, and I'm kind of jealous. But anyway, Ruth is having trouble because she needs to make some new friends, and Charlotte has gone off without her, and she finds a clue in a book, and the clue is really intriguing. And the problem is that she kind of needs Charlotte to help her to find some more clues, because Charlotte knows the library better than anybody else, and she actually had found some clues and just didn't do anything with them. And so it kind of brings them together a little bit, and she's also using some other friends. She makes some new friends who are into puzzles and are really interested in solving this riddle with her. So there's this little kind of gang, this little Scooby gang that goes around town trying to solve this riddle. So they have little riddles, and it's like a scavenger hunt, and there are little messages around town, and it's kind of cute. And then there's a big snowstorm. Okay, maybe they're not in San Francisco. I totally made that up. I don't know where they are. Anyway, there's a big snowstorm, and the roof of the library collapses, and so the library, a lot of things are destroyed, and Charlotte's family is displaced, and so because their parents are still friends, they're kind of slammed together again. So I think this is an interesting book. I really liked it. I think it's that typical paradigm of best friends growing apart and finding your own place, but it's under this backdrop of this riddle and an idea that some of the adults in town might have been kids before and had some of the same fun and same ideas, and then making new friends in this really interesting way. And, in the end, I won't spoil it for you, Ruth and Charlotte are not best friends. They do grow apart, and that's very realistic. I like that. But I thought overall this was a really sweet book. Definitely worth your while. All right, I told you that I was reading the selection, and I plowed through, I think, two of the books this month. The Elite is the second book in the series, and I have to say, I talked to a lot of librarians who told me that this was their favorite, and I can see why this would be their favorite. So basically, this story, you might have heard me talk about it, it's kind of like Hunger Games and Pretty Dresses. So this is this very well-developed dystopian society where everyone has a class or a caste, and they're numbered. And so the higher your number, the worse off you are. And the royalty is level 1, and this girl is a level 5, and they're performers, and she's an artist and a singer, and her family doesn't have a lot of money, but the royalty have this tradition where they bring together girls from all over the land, and they compete to win the hand of the prince. And the selection process is much like a reality show. It's like The Bachelor, where he hangs out with them and goes on dates, and then they're dismissed one at a time. Anyway, this woman, she's 16, and her name is America, and she isn't really there. She isn't really interested in getting married to the prince. She isn't really interested in being royalty because she thinks they're kind of creepy. But the tricky part is that if you're part of the selection, they send money home to your family, and her family really needs it. And so she figures the longer she can stay, the more she can support her family, which I think is an interesting twist. But she is starting to fall in love with the prince. Now, this book has a little more intrigue in it. I think there's some interesting moral quandaries in this book. Things about, does the punishment fit the crime? And um, does the royal family really care about people? I think it's really interesting. I'm not going to say much because I don't want to spoil it. But teens who love Divergent, who loved Hunger Games, but also have a love for things like reality TV and The Bachelor, this one I think is definitely worth your while to keep buying this series. And I'm going to go out of order because I can. And I did read the one. It's not as good. You know exactly how it's going to end, and it does turn into this little love triangle, blah, blah, blah. But the same really interesting questions keep being brought up about love and morality and how should a society work, and how to break out of it when it's been this way for so long. This book, the one, there's a big kind of war scene towards the end, and some very shocking things happen. So it's definitely good. I don't think it's as good as The Elite, but it's still good. So there you go, my little, and I rarely read sequels because I don't have time, but this one I like. So take that as you will. Okay, The Kidney Hypothetical. This book cracked me up. It's on One Click Digital. And it's about this. It's a boy. His name is Higgs Boson-Bing, which is just the funniest name I've ever heard in my life. And obviously, his family very intellectual. And the whole premise is that he has this perfect life, and he has this perfect girlfriend. And one day, the girls get together and start asking their boyfriends the kidney hypothetical, which is, if I needed a kidney, would you give me yours or one of yours? And he pauses because he's really trying to be thoughtful of his answer, and he gets in big trouble with that. And so it's this big drama, and he is suddenly shaken out of his perfect life. And so his whole identity starts to crumble. And it's very interesting because he starts to dig into, why was he so obsessed with being perfect? Well, part of the reason is that his older brother Jeffrey died in a car accident, and he was the perfect kid, and he held all the dreams and hopes of his parents. And now Higgs is shouldering all of that, which is very, very hard. And so he's really looking into this and trying to figure out, what does this mean? And am I going to Harvard because I want to, or because Jeffrey was going to go there? And what does this mean for my future? And I think this is a really interesting book, especially for the overachievers that you have in your libraries, which I'm sure you know. So one of the interesting twists in the story is he meets this girl named Monarch. I was scrolling down to see if I could remember her name. I'm terrible with names. And she's this like goth girl who lives in a trailer in the woods, and she's completely opposite, or is she, of Higgs, and they start hanging out together. And she's really the catalyst to try to shake Higgs out of his mindset of, you have to be perfect, you have to do everything that Jeffrey was going to do, and take over his legacy. In the end, there's a very interesting twist, and I will not ruin it for you, but I think this is a good one to have in your library. It's a decent high school read. I really liked it. All right, next, The Question of Miracles. I loved this book. It's definitely a DCF level book. Probably like a, I don't know, 5th grade book. It's about a girl named Iris. She's a 6th grader, and she has moved to Oregon, and she hates it. I think they lived in California before, and Oregon is rainy and muddy, and what the heck is this? And her parents are trying to start over, and you find out that part of the reason is that Iris's best friend has just died, and they really felt a new start would help Iris. So she is going through a tremendous amount of grief, and she's starting this whole new life in a new place, and she is hating it. And so her dad is an interesting character. He really wants to really redefine their lives. So he has bought this farmland and they want to have chickens and crops, and he wants to be self-sustainable and off the grid. And they originally wanted to homeschool Iris, and she would have none of it. So she is going to take the bus to school, and it's great. But she's having a lot of trouble making friends, especially since no one's going to replace her best friend. So one day she meets this kid named Boris, who does not fit in at all. He is this kind of science geek who doesn't know when to keep his knowledge to himself. And so they become friends, kind of, I don't know, at default, because they happen to be sitting at the same lunch table. And Boris, the boy, tells her that he was a miracle, that he was supposed to die as a baby, and he survived, and it was a miracle. And in a little interesting twist, one of his aunts is trying to get the archdiocese of the Catholic Church to call this a true miracle, so that somebody can be sainted, because I don't know, somebody prayed for him or something. So this intrigues Iris, because she starts thinking, okay, you got a miracle. Well, why didn't my best friend get a miracle? And so she goes on this quest to really try to figure out, what does it mean to have a miracle? And she questions the priests who come and talk, and there's a little bit of religion, but honestly it's just one of the many paths that she goes down. She talks to a psychic. She tries to have a seance. She thinks that Sarah, her best friend, might be living in the closet, because the old new house is creaky, and so she buys her a birthday present and leaves it in the closet. And the one thing about this book that's a little weird is that her parents don't realize how much she's struggling, and I find that hard to believe. They sent her to therapy, but when you're a sixth grader and you lose your best friend, that's rough stuff. So I find it hard to believe that her parents had no idea that she was struggling. So that part's a little strange, but other than that, I think this is a really interesting book about grief and about being the new kid and finding a new identity for yourself. So I really like this book. I definitely think you should buy it and read it. All right, now this book is really different. Bone Gap. You might have seen this cover. It has gotten a lot of press. I think that the marketing campaign is pretty intense for this book. I thought this book, I really liked it up to the last, I don't know, maybe 50 pages, and then it kind of went off the deep end for me. Now, I will tell you, I don't like magical realism. I really don't like it, especially when it comes out of left field. And I felt like this one did. It was totally realistic until the last 50 pages, and all of a sudden it took a left turn into Crazy Town. But that being said, I really think this book is interesting. It's about two brothers, and Finn is the younger brother, and his older brother, I can't remember his name. I don't remember. But his older brother, Sean, they live together. They have lost their parents, and Finn dropped out of school to take care. Sean dropped out of school to take care of Finn, and Finn is in high school, and they have this. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens in this town. It's called Bone Gap, which is in itself strange, and it's this quiet little town. And there is this girl that they talk about. So it alternates perspectives. So you have chapters from Sean, from Finn, and from this girl, Rosa. And Rosa, she is this mysterious girl who showed up in their barn one day and lived with them for a little while and then disappeared. And Finn was a witness to this, but he can't help the police the way that they need him to. He keeps describing the person who took her, and they're not getting the information that that they need from him, and he feels unbelievably guilty about that. And Rosa was unbelievably charismatic. Everyone who knew her loved her, and so her disappearance weighs heavy on this town. So in the different stories that are kind of unfolding, which I think was really interesting, you find out that Rosa came from, I'm not sure what country she came from, but she maybe Russia? I'm not sure. I'm going to be making it up, so I'm just not going to say. She comes from another country, and she decided to do a study abroad program to go to the United States. And when she does, she gets kidnapped by this trafficker, and she escapes, and that's how she ends up in the barn, and she's run away from this guy, and that's how she becomes part of their lives, which is really interesting. So this book, it's like a puzzle mystery. You really don't know anything in the beginning. It all unfolds. And then in the middle of it, you have Finn, who is having this romance with a girl who is a beekeeper and a little esoteric. She's quite funny, and no one can really understand why he's attracted to her, and because there's allusions to the fact that she is funny looking, which we don't really understand, but he is just crazy about her. So anyway, I'm going to spoil this for you right now. Are you ready? You can turn off the volume. Okay, I'm going to spoil this. So Finn has a disorder, which I can't even pronounce. Basically, he has an inability to recognize faces, which is a very unusual neurological disorder. The part of the brain that recognizes faces is very specialized, and his is not working. And so he can recognize people by the way they walk, by the way they sound, by the way they smell. He can't recognize faces, and so that's why he can't help the police. It causes some angst for his girlfriend, because she's like, how can you love me if you can't even recognize me? And I think this is a really, really interesting part of this book. So anyway, loved this book. And then in the end, it takes a left turn into Crazy Town, lots of magical realism and dreams and stuff that I don't really understand. So I don't really get that part, but somebody out there will. Some of your teens will really like that. All right, moving on. No more spoilers. Fort. I loved this book. It's short and sweet, just like summer books should be, and it's about these two best friends who are having summer adventures, and they are camping in the woods, and there's this cast of hilariously quirky characters, and one of their grandfathers owns a junkyard, which is fantastic for building forts, and so and they have this hilarious grandmother, and they want to build a fort, and they want to go sleep out in the woods, and because that's their summer dream. But meanwhile, there are bullies in town who are trying to thwart them, and they are picking on this kid who's developmentally disabled. We don't really know what his issue is, but he gets blamed for a lot of things that he couldn't possibly have done. So these kids take him under their wing, and they find out that the bullies have been harassing him a lot more than they even knew. So they plan a kind of Home Alone style caper trap for these bullies, and it is awesome. Everyone in town helps. So, it's good fun. It's a summer adventure about best friends, and, there's a very clear delineation between right and wrong, which is very much appropriate for this age. I really liked it. It's short, sweet, good summer read. All right, next, Sarah Dessen. I love Sarah Dessen. I've read a lot of her books, and I have to say this is one of her best. It reminds me a lot of, what's the other book she wrote? The Truth About Forever, which I adored. This book is awesome. I really, really liked it, and I definitely think it belongs on your shelves. So it's about a girl named Sydney, who has an older brother, Peyton. And Peyton is charismatic and everyone loves him and he's this perfect child. But then he kind of goes off the deep end and starts dealing drugs and getting into trouble. And the whole story opens up with them in court, and he has been sentenced to some jail time. And we're not really sure what happened, but Sydney is just devastated. And because she feels invisible, you'd think that with the brother in jail, that she would start getting some more attention, but it doesn't happen at all. In fact, her mom becomes obsessed with making sure that Peyton has all of the best accommodations and the lawyer advocates, and it's kind of insane. Like she can't admit that her son did anything wrong. Like everything is about him being a victim, and Sydney has had enough. So she goes to a prep school, and part of her knows that her parents are spending a tremendous amount of money on Peyton's defense, and part of her thinks she needs a new start, and so she transfers to the local high school. And there she gets to start over. She still keeps her friends at the prep school and talks to them a lot. And she wanders into a pizza place after school one day and meets this family. So there's a daughter that becomes really good friends with, and her brother, who she develops a big crush on, and then the father and the mother. The mother has MS, and the father runs the pizza place, and they are just this fantastic family, and they take her in with open arms, and it's really wonderful. But of course, when the mom learns that she's spending so much time there and that she started to date the brother, the whole thing falls apart, because the mom really thinks she should be focusing on her family and that she should be, visiting the brother and talking to him. And Sydney's really struggling with this. Peyton doesn't want her to visit him in jail, and the mom is trying to control his life, and Peyton pushes back in a big way, and mom starts to take it out on Sydney, and suddenly her life is being micromanaged. And it's interesting because it's not like she's giving her the attention she needs. She's just trying to control her, which is not effective. So it's a really, really interesting story. It unfolds in this really great way. It's also about, the family that runs a pizza place, they're having money struggles. And Sydney lives in a giant house in a really rich part of town and doesn't have to worry about money, and doesn't have a job. So it's this kind of clash of the classes, which is very interesting, and is not easy to talk about with all of these kids. And then the mom has MS, and they're struggling with that, and she really wants to be a good friend to them. Interwoven into this story is the mom's blindness when it comes to Peyton's best friend from prison or from rehab, who has kind of adopted them and has won them over with a large amount of charm, but Sydney finds him creepy and does not want to be alone with him for good reason. And the mom insists on having him babysit her, basically. And there is a sexual assault in there, so I will warn you about that. It's tough, and the mom has to face, some hard stuff that she hasn't been looking at, and that she hasn't really been listening to her daughter. And Sydney hasn't really spoken up. So there's some really, I think, interesting concepts in this book, some really great themes. I loved it. So I would highly recommend this book. It belongs in your teen section for sure. All right, what else we got? Oh no. So this is another book that I skimmed. I love Allie Carter. I love the Gallagher Girls series, but this book just, I don't know. I skipped most of the middle. I read the end and I got it, and I don't know. I think the concept is interesting. Her name is Grace. She lives in this dystopian society where they call it Embassy Row, where all of the different ambassadors are all together, and so you have these lines of demarcation between one country and another. But the world is a very different place. But one of the things that was troubling to me, I'm not sure, is that Iran is hyped on as being a very evil place. I almost rather she would have made up a different, like a fake country for that, just because they're made out to be pretty evil, and I I don't know if that's the great message to be sending to kids. I know Iran has a lot of problems, but um, I don't. I had some trouble with that. Anyway, that's my hang up. Anyway, so Grace she witnessed her mother's murder, and she's having some trouble. And her grandfather is the ambassador to the United States, and they're in a land that I can't remember. What is this world called? It's this country called, who the heck knows? It's this bland country, and they're all ambassadors to this country, and so her grandfather is the ambassador to the United States, very powerful, and he has ordered her to come live with him. And so now she's interacting with all of these other ambassadors' kids and ambassadors, and but she keeps messing up. And the problem is that every time she messes up, it's this like public relations nightmare. I don't know. There's a lot of hijinks, and she's trying to figure out who murdered her mother, because they actually sent her to a mental institution because she saw this murder and she's convinced she knows who did it, and they didn't believe her. So she really wants to prove that she's not crazy. And the way that it unfolds in the very end, I thought was interesting. It's an interesting kind of take on mental illness, and the twist is kind of interesting, I guess. Some kids might like it. And might want to read the second book. All in all, it wasn't my favorite. I thought the world building was kind of lazy, and the characters were not that interesting, and I felt like a lot of the madness in the middle of the book was totally unnecessary. But that's just me. All right, we already talked about the one. Oh, I just finished this book, and thank you to Kelsey Lowe who put this one in my hands. I really liked this one. This is a memoir written by Josh Sundquist, and you might recognize his name. He is a motivational speaker, and he's also a Paralympic skier, and he was on the Olympic team. And he wrote this book, and it is hysterical. It is about basically his failure with girls, and every section is about a different girl. And one of them he thought he was dating, but it actually wasn't. And one of them he only dated for 24 hours. And, and he had a stalker at one point, and it's really funny. So basically he goes through the background of, all the mistakes he made and the story. And a lot of these stories is, he had big crushes and never told her, and she never told him. And so they just kind of were ships passing in the night. And then what he does, so he outlines the background and in one chapter or in one section, and then the next section is a hypothesis for why this failed, and that's pretty short. And then after that, there's the investigation. And so, he's about 25 now, and so he calls up these people and says basically, it reminds me a lot of that movie High Fidelity, where John Cusack goes around asking all the women in his life, why didn't you like me? It's just very similar. And so he contacts these women and is like, what happened to us? And then finds out what happened. And in most cases, it's something bizarre, like, I had a crush on you and I didn't think you liked me back. Oh my gosh, I should have said something. The last chapter is very hopeful. He finally meets somebody and starts dating for real. But this is a really cute story because he talks. The end part is a little cheesy, didactic, just because he is an amputee. His leg is amputated from the hip down, and he talks very candidly about his prosthetic and when he uses it, when he doesn't, and some of the awkward social interactions because of it. And he blames a lot of his dating failures on being an amputee. But in the end, he really kind of releases himself from that. And I think it transcends that. I really just think it's a lot about, finding your way and how it doesn't always work out. And, not everything is like the movies. And so I think this is really refreshing because it's not a happily ever after story. It's about a lot of mistakes, and it's hilarious, and it's very self-effacing. And I think it's good for kids to read about an awesome guy who's 25 and has never had a girlfriend. And there's nothing wrong with him. So I definitely think this is a worthwhile purchase. It's a memoir, so if kids really like true stories, this could be a good one. And I think you can pair it with his other books about being a Paralympic athlete, because I think that some of your kids are going to be really interested. All right, this last book I also just finished. We Are All Made of Molecules. This book, the publisher nominated it for GMBA, but I'm having some trouble deciding whether it belongs in GMBA or DCF. I'm leaning towards DCF, but the high end of DCF. I think it's a middle school read. It's a really important book, but it's on that cusp. So one of the funny things about this book is there's no swearing in it. They say the F word instead of actually saying it, and they don't swear at all. However, there are some very tough topics in this book that may not be appropriate for your younger readers. So this is about two kids. Ashley is 14, Stuart is 13, but has been he's skipped a grade, and so they're both in 9th grade. Stuart's mom died 2 years before, and she had cancer, and his father has started dating Ashley's mom, and Ashley is struggling with her parents' divorce because her parents got divorced because her dad is gay. And just to make the story more interesting, they live on this giant kind of estate, and the father is essentially living on the same property in like a carriage house. And so when Stuart and his dad move in, all of a sudden you have Stuart and Ashley and their parents who are living together, and the father living in the same property. So it just, it threw all of them together. So Stuart goes to this kind of gifted school and is unbelievably brilliant, but socially not so much, and he knows that. And so he's decided that he wants to go to the regular high school to work on some of his social skills, also because they live in Canada and his commute would be horrible. So he wants to try it out in the high school. The problem is that he is in classes with Ashley, and Ashley thinks he is a loser. So Stuart is bullied pretty hardcore, and he's picked on a lot, especially in gym class, as you would expect, because Stuart is 13, he's younger than all the other kids, plus he's also small for his age, so he's prime target for bullying, while Ashley is really popular and is considered the hot girl in her class. So Stuart, kind of brilliantly, he's about to get attacked by these high school, these football boys, and he says, wait, Ashley's my sister, my stepsister, and they back off. And so he thinks he's becoming friends with these football kids, but really they're just trying to hook up with Ashley. And Ashley really loves it because she wants to be the center of attention with these football boys too. However, it gets Ashley into some interesting conundrums because, Stuart is kind of helping her, but Ashley doesn't want to like him, and he doesn't, there's all this tension in the house. Meanwhile, she's having a lot of trouble with the fact that her father is gay and has started dating and lives so close by. And she hasn't told any of her friends why they got divorced or that her father's gay or any of it. And so she's really, really struggling with this. And when she finds out that the football kid is a big homophobe, she gets really upset, and she's kind of struggling with that. And she's even pissed that Stuart knows all of this about her family. So anyway, there is a lot of underage drinking in this book and partying. Ashley is thrown into some pretty hardcore high school party situations. Also, because she's the it girl, all the boys are after her, but they're not really interested in her, of course. They just want to have sex with her. And there are some very intense sexual assault scenes. There are 2 of them. They're not graphic, but emotionally they're very tough. And Stuart actually saves her from one of them. And it's hard. So that's what makes it really hard for me to figure out what population this goes in. I think it's pretty solidly a middle school read. Like I said, there's no swearing, there's no out and out sex. There is talk of, homophobia and bullying, definitely, and partying, and there's description of sexual assaults. But I think those are really important issues for this age range. So I think, anyway, the title is called We Are All Made of Molecules, and Stuart has this thing where, he's really missing his mom, and he believes that her molecules are still around, and he breathes them in. So he has her old Afghan, and he's breathing them in. It's really interesting to see, the 2 families combine, and, Ashley's family is very clean and modern, and Stuart's family walks in and has all this tchotchkes and colorful paintings and stuff, and they have a lot of trouble kind of meshing their lives. And just like it's very parallel to the 2 teenagers. In the end, is very sweet. It's not perfect, but it is very sweet. And I think this is a wonderful book. You may want to put it in your YA section, but again, I think it is solidly middle school, and I think it's really good. So those are all the books I have for you today. I'm halfway through maybe one day, and I love it so far. And I don't know what I'm going to read yet. This I'm listening to. We'll see. Anyway, you can contact me lots of different ways, but email is the best way. Again, you can go to these. If you go to contact us from the list, you can send a general email. It takes a couple of days to get to me, though. The staff directory will get you to all of us. If you're interested in getting book discussion sets, Linda Willis-Pendo is your gal. And here's me right here, and here's my assistant, Aiden. Please email me or call anytime if you have questions, comments, suggestions about what I should be reading. Please don't hesitate to tell me. And I hope that you have a great rest of the summer.